welcome to this very special episode of Sharing the Mic with Frontline AIDS. I'm Ben Plumley, host of a Shot in the Arm podcast, and this is the second of two episodes that we've produced while we've been at the UN General Assembly in New York. Well, we're going to meet up with another of the partners of Frontline AIDS and a very special new guest who is actually known to us at a Shot in the Arm podcast. First up, Cindy Kelemi, who is the Executive Director of Bonela from Botswana. Cindy, hey, it's great to see you.
Thank you so much for having me. It's great to be here.
Yeah, we got a lot to discuss about the state of the AIDS response, and I know Bonela's right at the forefront of that. And we're also joined by a friend of a Shot in the Arm podcast who has now got a new hat. She might not physically be wearing it, but please welcome the new Executive Director of Frontline AIDS, the Frontline AIDS Partnership, Robin Gorna. Robin, hey,
Hi.
Welcome to Sharing the Mic formally.
I'm delighted to be here, and it's just such a privilege to be here with so many of our partners. Lovely to be back with Shot in the Arm, but great to be with Frontline AIDS.
In the first part of the show, we spoke to some of the key linking organisation partners on the ground, listening to how this week is shaping up. And I just wondered, maybe at the 38,000 foot level for you both, just picking up on this sense that we may be sort of regressing, going back in time, and not engaging civil society as we might have done in the past. Is that your sense? I don't know, Cindy, if you want to.
Yes, and that's precisely why someone like me is here who works at a country level to echo the message that, pandemics start within communities and therefore they end within communities. Therefore, there is no how we can have all these discussions at the exclusion of communities. And civil society are an integral part of the community. Therefore, if we are having these discussions at the exclusion of civil society, really how are we going to ensure sustainability of the issues we are talking about? Because like the speaker from Arasa said earlier on, that, the accountability framework is really hinged on civil society, because they are the ones who will then take these documents that have been agreed upon and hold their respective governments accountable for delivery. And more often than not, we do get these policy documents at a global level, and then they don't get implemented because civil society was sidelined. So we are here to send the message that it's important for civil society to be part of the discussions, because they are an integral part of the equation.
Yeah. Robin, you and I have been on all sides of the fence. The UN, in your case, the UK government, civil society as well. What's your sense of this decline, if I can call it that?
It's always for me intensely moving coming back to New York, because I was here a lot in the 80s and 90s and had a lot of friends who are no longer here because they died from AIDS. And it's also intensely moving because the first time I came to a UN General Assembly was 2001, and I came as a representative of an AIDS organisation in the civil society. And since that time, I've been back with the government pass and I've been back with the UN pass. And I'm so glad to be back with an NGO pass again. But having lived through those, 22 years of coming back and forth to UNGA and coming back and forth in different roles, I just totally agree with what Cindy said about the disappointment at the lack of community. And when we were here in 2001, we were lobbying for the creation of the Global Fund, and we were really successful, right? But civil society back then did some pretty, tough negotiating and pushed hard. And we pushed hard in the declarations, and we've pushed hard again, and it's not coming through enough. It's really not. The first time I joined you in Shot in the Arm is when I was living with long COVID, and we were fighting hard to get people with lived experience of COVID into the national responses. And I was very moved a couple of days ago. The French Global Health Ambassador, Ambassador Ambrou, I think I've just mangled her name, but she spoke about the fact that in France, they switched direction about a year into the COVID epidemic because they realised they'd basically forgotten to involve communities and they weren't getting the response right. And as we have this pandemic preparedness declaration that thank goodness has come through, I mean, that's good because for a minute we thought it was not going to happen. Yeah. It's still not strong enough on communities. And if we know anything from the AIDS response, what we know is that it is only possible to make a change if communities are at the heart. A lot of people look to the AIDS response and say, oh, it's done now. Now, I don't think we do think it's done. I just had a great meeting with a number of the partners of Frontline AIDS this morning. And it's, you know, in some countries like your own, Cindy, I mean, you've achieved huge results, 95, 95, 95. All credit to Botswana.
Now, just explain what the 95 means in this context.
Okay, so 95% of people who are living with HIV know their status. And then 95 of those who know their status are actually on treatment. And 95% of those who are on treatment are virally suppressed. But from Botswana, it's actually 95, 97, 98. It's 5-2-2. That's what we are dealing with now.
And it's kind of amazing, isn't it? And yet we've got to make sure that the world doesn't go, oh, that's good enough. I mean, it is pretty amazing. But we still have globally 1.5 million infections a year. And I think that's too many. And we have countries like your neighbouring South Africa where far too many people, some say 2.5 million, are not on treatment right now. What's that about? And we've got, 600,000 deaths a year. And those numbers are unacceptably high. So somehow we have to hold the balance, I think, as organisations that are focused on AIDS or began in the AIDS movement to say, we've got to keep the pressure on with AIDS. And things are a heck of a lot better. And they're better because communities are at the heart. And they're better because of the Global Fund. They're better because of PEPFAR. They're better because of national governments. But fundamentally, they're better because communities are doing the right thing, advocating for the rights of people, as well as delivering services. And that's the mix we need for making sure we sustain our successes and supporting the pandemics that will come in the future. And making sure we also get access to universal health coverage for the most marginalised communities that we have got fundamentally at our core.
Yeah.
And one thing to add to this, which is really driven by community, that 98, 99% of people who are undetectable, that means they're also untransmissible.
Yes.
U equals U. And of course, Michael Ighodaro, who is a board member of Frontline AIDS, is also one of the new leaders of the Prevention Action Campaign, pushing that agenda. It's really terrific to hear. But I guess enough looking at the past, where do we go from here? Some people are saying, and Ntombi referred to this, the Sustainable Development Goals that are supposed to be met by 2030. And which I guess means that HIV is over in some way. I think it's fair to say we're not going to reach those goals. But what should the long-term policy and advocacy agenda be for the HIV response in the context of the pandemic era post-COVID?
Yeah, I think that prevention still needs to be at the top of our priorities, because we should remember that there are children who are born now who do not have the same experience that we do. There are people who are afraid of of catching HIV because they have seen somebody who is HIV positive, or at least sick from AIDS. And yet we have a generation that has never experienced that. So we need to be now coming up with innovative ideas of how we make prevention work, especially for our young people. When you look at our numbers, at least for Botswana, when you look at condom usage, it's at its lowest. Yet we still have new infections every single day. So how do we ensure that our programs are relevant to the extent that they can respond effectively to the needs of our young people, especially insofar as AIDS is concerned. I think we need innovation. A lot of times there is a feeling that there is fatigue, AIDS fatigue. We need to address that head on, because like Robin is saying, the war against AIDS is not over. In fact, in some communities, it has just begun. So we need then to be responsive and relevant in terms of our programs so that we can ensure that we end AIDS by 2030.
I mean, I'd want to go one stage further. I'm going to borrow Robin's older hats and be as perhaps more provocative than I have been in the past. I think our HIV prevention approaches over the last 30 years, frankly, in the global south have been a disaster. They have not worked. We really haven't, despite the UNAIDS figures, we really haven't seen a significant drop in new infections over the last 15 years. And I don't know why that is. I do think the political will is right at the heart of it. The condoms, the abstinence, behavior change, those were our tools. We now have PrEP, pre-exposure prophylaxis in pill form, hopefully in injectable form at some point. But I don't understand why we haven't been able to crack this.
Well, and let's not forget with PrEP, we also have the dapivirine vaginal ring. And for some of us who are youth activists who've been youth activists for a few decades, so we've aged a little, we'll remember that back in the 80s and 90s, we were pushing for a microbicide, something that women could use for themselves. Now we have it, and yet a bunch of old men sitting in America have said, oh, we don't think we want to approve this. You know, we have got to get the tools that we have into the hands of the young women, men and non-binary and, you know, gender diverse people that they need, that they want. And I think we've got to start talking about sex again. I mean, it's extraordinary how we can talk about HIV and not talk about sex and not talk about pleasure and not talk about what the drivers of this infection are. And the reason HIV and AIDS attract so much stigma and attract so much difficulty in our world and why it became such a major issue is because it's right at that nexus of where we gain pleasure in life and things that we don't like to talk about. And I was really struck by a few conversations over the last few days with the youth leaders that we have. And we have a great intergenerational dialogue going in amongst the partnership of Frontline AIDS and also more broadly here. Young people are the majority in Africa. And they are making change in their societies, but they don't always have as much voice. And yesterday I had the privilege of attending a meeting of the First Ladies of Africa. There were some spectacular discussions, some really brave and bold visions from some of those First Ladies. And then a young woman stood up and she said, "You've got to co-lead with us. I want each of you First Ladies to have a young person in your office working with you." Massive applause, because ultimately societies won't change unless we let young people lead and ask for what they need. And I think that's partly where we're getting it a bit wrong. We've made it a little bit polite, and part of the issue here is it's not always polite. The other thing that we were talking about yesterday, and I think this is really important to our mission as Frontline AIDS, is that there are so many other sexually transmitted conditions, as well as pregnancy and other sexually transmitted condition, that are affecting our young people. Every 90 seconds, a young person gets cervical cancer. And yet this is one of the most easily preventable of diseases, of cancers with HPV vaccination. It is easily treatable. And yet the rates of death in Africa are extraordinarily high. They're 8 times as high the rest of the world. Why are we not doing more to link together our HIV, our cervical cancer, our programs on FGS bilharzia, which is again another condition that makes women and girls much more vulnerable to HIV. We really need to look at this intersection, because when you walk around this world, you don't think HIV one day, cervical cancer the next, pregnancy the third. It's about what's going on in our lives. What makes us vulnerable? How do we deal with poverty? And, you know, as Frontline AIDS, we're also really totally focused on marginalised communities, so also on our refugees and in internally displaced people, huge increasing numbers there. Let's think about prisoners, let's think about drug users, the people in society that maybe politicians don't always want to think about first. These are the people that we as community organisations know need to be at the heart of everything we do.
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
And just to add that the issue around inequalities as well, it's a problem for us, especially in Southern Africa. I think, and that's what breeds, for instance, issues around gender-based violence, where women are unable to negotiate safe sex in relationships because the relationships are too toxic. And, when you look at the context of Botswana as an example, we are one of the leading countries in the world with rape incidents. So it's not surprising that we also have such high HIV incidents. So until we begin to really in earnest address some of these drivers of HIV, including gender-based violence, then we are really losing the battle. We also need to look at inequalities. For instance, we know that women who have not been to school are more susceptible to getting HIV. We also know that, for instance, girls who are not retained in schools are also susceptible to HIV infections. So how do we know that, for instance, most of the, or at least a good number of sex workers in the sex work industry, some of them are as a result of unemployment and poverty. How do we address all those underlying issues so that we can effectively address or reduce the incidence of HIV? So it basically needs for us to really look into our programs and ensure that they respond to the needs of people holistically.
Well, just building on that, I think it's such an important point. And, one of the slogans has always been human rights is women's rights, and as Frontline Aids, the core of our model is the intersection between health, human rights and community. And one of the problems that worries me at the moment is people say, of all the health conditions, HIV is handled. But it's not a health condition. It's a rights issue. It's a life issue. And that's where we need to start putting the person at the centre of this and thinking about what are we doing? How are we addressing equity? How are we addressing rights? And when you ask about, why are things not going as well as they should be? Of course, it's about rights as well.
Yeah, and we know that there has been quite a lot of pushback on rights, especially in Southern Africa. That's why we have draconian laws, such as the one we have in Uganda, which basically criminalizes LGBTIQ plus persons in the most unprecedented we've ever seen anywhere else. So that's an indication of how, our failure to address HIV as a human rights issue. It's really making us fail in terms of reaching epidemic control.
And within that as well, one of the horrors of the Ugandan situation is it criminalises directly the individuals. It also criminalises the service providers. So there is no longer an incentive to provide services for LGBTQI human beings, because then if a service provider could also be thrown in jail, as well as the individuals being sentenced with death. And this is on the march across a number of African countries. And we know there's foreign influence behind this.
Oh, I was going to say, let's be really direct about it. It's far-right Christian nationalism from the United States that has been trying to get these laws passed. In Kenya, all of us, not Kenya, Uganda, so many of us have been working on this, taking the lead from groups like Sexual Minorities Uganda, really to help counter this. And it strikes me that there's something that Jupram from Kana said in relation to pandemics preparedness and response, that no one is safe until everyone is safe. Well, the flip side is true. If someone is at risk, we are all at risk. And we should not assume that these kind of laws stop in Uganda. They are going to try to be played out everywhere.
Well, and they are on the march. I mean, we know that there are many, many countries in Africa right now where this kind of legislation is teetering on the edge of the legislature. So we really know that. And it's about how do we build those coalitions, but how do we also let our communities in Africa lead this? I mean, it's also happening in other countries, like Indonesia has also got a really repressive law right now. Things have tightened up in Malaysia too. But we need to make sure, and that's what's fundamentally important for us at Frontline AIDS is, as angry as it makes all of us, we've got to hear from communities what's the smart thing to do in country, because we know there are external influences generating this. And how can we, most Ugandans I speak to say, this is not Ugandan morality. We have always had our gay communities and we have celebrated and integrated them in our society. So, why are we being told that this is an African response to be anti-homosexuality? That's not true. So let's try and find continental solutions, I think, to turn this around.
Yeah. And I think it's an important time to talk about investment and investment into the response, because the forces that you are talking about, which are basically sponsoring, these religious extremists, are fully funded, well funded and coordinated. So in the same way, we also need to have civil society interventions, responses fully funded. And we have to do more in ensuring that there is actually money available to support these interventions, because we can see that the religious extremists or fundamentalists basically are organized and they have support. So we also need to do the same in order for us to really turn the tide against these bad laws that are affecting Africa.
Yeah, totally. So 2 reflections on what you have both said. The first, Cindy, around this sort of whole person approach, without mentioning names, a very senior civil servant in Zimbabwe's health response. I asked her not too long ago, what would be the single most important intervention we should really be focusing on in taking the HIV response to the next level. And she really surprised me. The single most important intervention was girls' secondary education. And that really struck a nerve with me, but it really reaffirms, I think, this sense that you don't look at HIV as something that you deal with on a Monday and Thursday. It's something that exploits the weaknesses of our societies and the and sort of dehumanizes the weakest or the most marginalized amongst us. The second thing, Robin, thinking about what you said, I think you're absolutely right that us Northerners need to shut up and listen and be led by leaders on the ground, leaders in countries who are facing this directly. Take Uganda as an example. Frank Mugisha and his team have a very clear agenda, and it is incumbent on us to listen and follow. It's not incumbent on us to say, well, we'll take bits of this and we'll use it we'll go and protest outside, whatever. So as you leave New York at the end of this week, what are the priorities for you? Cindy, what are you going to take back?
Well, I'm hoping that the documents will be adopted, the political documents will be adopted, and once they are adopted, we'll be really happy about that, because we worked really hard in ensuring that they really speak to the needs of our respective societies. And I think a lot of what we recommended has been embraced, and we are really happy about that. But the bigger thing for me is that we need to ensure implementation. And our role as civil society is to hold our governments to account to the commitments they have made. I want to recall when the African continent came together and agreed through the Abuja Declaration that 15% of our national budgets will be allocated to health. How many of them have achieved that? What accountability mechanisms have we used to hold them to account? I want to believe not much is happening there. It's almost like a song that everybody knows that 15% should be, but then what is happening about it? So in the same way, we don't want history to repeat itself. We really want to take these documents with us to go to the country level, because at a global level, they mean nothing unless they are integrated, or the priorities are integrated into national strategic frameworks. So we have to ensure that whatever has been agreed at a global level is actually we are able to to integrate it into our national frameworks. That's the first step. And then we also need to ensure that at a national level, we have mechanisms for monitoring and tracking. That is critical, so that at the end of it all, we can look back and say, this is the change that was brought about by this global commitment at a country level, when we are realizing that people have better access to services, when we realize that people they don't have much out-of-pocket expenditure, that they are receiving, decent health services, that the health providers are providing services that are non-discriminatory. For us, that would be the indicator of success.
Robin, I guess you are in listening mode, and we've got a very clear set of priorities there set out by Cindy. You're, 3 weeks now into the job?
It's day 11.
Day 11. What are you hearing?
I mean, I think the points Cindy's making there about accountability are so important. And we talked before about the fact that I've been here with, UN hat on and a government hat on. And in those hats, everybody gets obsessed about getting the right words on the page. I've even been negotiating semicolons at 3 a.m. You got to get the text right. The text is meaningless if it doesn't get implemented. And some countries are great at that, and some countries are lousy. They sign up to any old word. So this is really a key component of the community response. But as you say, I have been listening. I've got a lot more listening to do. And it's really so important to hear what the needs are. Most of our partners are expanding their remit, but keeping AIDS central or building on what they know from AIDS. So it's also thinking about what can we do better as we serve and support the partners of Frontline AIDS to make that easy for them. One of the really big messages they're giving is about money. I mean, we all know there's an awful lot less money available for HIV and AIDS. And in part, that's because there's been great success and there's a sense of, well, we do need to focus on other emerging priorities. I think that's correct and right. However, there's a real danger that the gains will be lost, that there will be resurgence, that we will lose the importance of the investments we've made. So one of the things that I think will be part of my role is to support our partners by staying in good contact with a range of donors and seeing what's possible, and creating space. I mean, the whole point of Frontline AIDS was always that these community organisations existed, and we were creating space to support them to engage with each other. And we've just had a really fantastic conversation where they've given me a few marching orders, I think, about how we can do that better and stronger, because it's not our job at a global level to tell community-based partners what to do. It never was and it never will be. But it is our job to see if there's things that we can do to support those connections and to support that learning. And I think this point on funding is so important. There's loads of money comparative to what there ever was in the Global Fund, and not enough of that is getting to the communities. And I'm really proud that so many of the Global Fund principal recipients from the community are partners of Frontline AIDS, especially when you remember that Frontline AIDS, as the International AIDS Alliance, was created long before the Global Fund, over a decade in advance. So how incredible that partners are doing that. But we need to make sure that more and more of that money is being accessed by community organisations and delivered where it matters. And PEPFAR. Let's just take a moment to praise PEPFAR. I mean, what an incredible thing that has been. Over less than 20 years, a total game changer. And it has kept so many millions of people alive, stopped so many millions of infections. And I think, like so many of us, I'm terrified.
Well, I hope
must continue.
I hope we're not going to say that PEPFAR has been such a major game changer, but that PEPFAR is and will continue to be a major game changer. Because, as you said, we haven't ended AIDS. We are not even in the final stretches. Well, I guess I should let you get back to the good work, getting into good trouble at the UN. Cindy, thank you so much. Really looking forward to hearing how Botswana gets to 100, 100, 100.
They always say the last sprint is the hardest.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then teaches everyone else how to get there, because that's the other big role that
Yeah.
you have.
And Robin, good luck on your listening tour, and we'll be coming back to check in with you to see how things are going. So thank you both very much.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for having us.
Well, that's it for this episode. Thanks to Cindy and thanks to Robin. Thanks also to our director and producer, Eric Aspera from Newsdoc Media, our New York producer, Chad Parisman. Thanks also to Ali Liu from Frontline AIDS. Hope you enjoyed these 2 episodes and look forward to seeing you again soon.